December 4th, 1872. The Atlantic Ocean. Somewhere between the Azores and the coast of Portugal. The crew of the Dei Gracia spotted a ship drifting in the open water. No flags, no signal, just drifting. The captain, David Morehouse, recognized the vessel immediately. He'd had dinner with its captain just a month before. They were friends. He called out, no response. He raised his signal flag. Nothing. He ordered his first mate, Oliver Deveau, to row over and board the ship. What Deveau found when he climbed aboard changed maritime history forever. The ship was the Mary Celeste, and it was completely, utterly abandoned. But here's what made this different from every other ghost ship story in history. There was hot food still on the table. The captain's bed had the indentation of a sleeping body, like someone had just gotten up moments ago. A child's toys were scattered across the floor. A cat was still sleeping below deck. And the crew, 10 people in total, including a captain, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter, were never seen again. Not a body, not a bone, not a single piece of clothing. Just gone. Stay with me, because this isn't just a mystery. This is the story that has haunted sailors, historians, investigators, and scientists for over 150 years. And to this day, no one has ever explained what actually happened. To understand what happened on the Mary Celeste, you have to understand where this ship came from. Because this ship, long before that day in December 1872, had already developed a reputation. Some sailors called it cursed. Not metaphorically cursed, not bad luck cursed. We're talking about a ship that seemed to attract disaster the way a storm attracts lightning. It was originally built in 1861 in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia. It was called the Amazon, and from the very beginning, something was wrong. The first captain, Robert McClellan, died of pneumonia just days after taking command. Days. The ship hadn't even left port yet. The second captain, John Parker, ran the ship into a fishing weir, a large wooden structure, on its very first voyage. It had to be towed back to port for repairs. On that same voyage, crossing the English Channel, it collided with another ship, the Beetleston, which sank. The Amazon kept going. The other ship sank. Then, during a storm, it ran aground on Cape Breton Island and had to be salvaged. By the time the ship was repaired and sold again, it had gone through 3 more owners. And finally, in 1868, the ship was sold to an American, refurbished, and renamed. They called it the Mary Celeste. A new name, a fresh start. And for a while, it actually seemed to work. The curse, if you believed in it, seemed to lift. By 1872, the Mary Celeste had a new captain. His name was Benjamin Spooner Briggs. And Captain Briggs was not a man who believed in curses. He was 37 years old. Clean-cut, deeply religious, a man of science, not superstition. He came from a family of sea captains. His father, his uncle, 2 of his brothers, all sea captains. The sea was in his blood. He had a wife, Sarah Elizabeth Cobb Briggs. She was 30, educated, sharp. She played the harmonium, a small portable organ, and often brought it along on voyages. They had 2 children. Their older son, Arthur, age 7, was left with relatives in Massachusetts. They thought the voyage would be too rough for him. But their younger daughter, Sophia Matilda Briggs, just 2 years old, they took with them. They took a 2-year-old baby onto that ship. That detail is going to matter. On November 7th, 1872, the Mary Celeste set sail from Pier 50 in New York Harbor. Its destination, Genoa, Italy. Its cargo, 1,701 barrels of commercial-grade alcohol, denatured ethanol, meant for fortifying Italian wines. The crew consisted of 8 men. Albert Richardson, the first mate. A trusted, experienced sailor. Andrew Gilling, second mate. Danish-born. Quiet, reliable, Edward Head, the cook, and 4 German sailors, Arian Martens, Gottlieb Gondeschalk, Volkert Lorentzen, and Boz Lorentzen. 10 people total, including the captain's wife and baby. The weather was good, the ship was well stocked, the cargo was properly loaded. By all accounts, this was supposed to be a routine voyage. Routine. Now here's where it gets strange. Before departure, Captain Briggs wrote a letter to his mother. In it he wrote, And I want you to really hear these words. He wrote, "Our vessel is in fine order, and I hope we shall have a pleasant voyage." That's the last communication anyone ever received from Benjamin Briggs. The Mary Celeste set sail, and somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, 10 people simply ceased to exist. Before we go any further, real quick, if this story is already pulling you in, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love deep, real mysteries like this one. And subscribe, because we go this deep on every single video. History, ocean mysteries, unexplained events, the kind of stories that Netflix builds entire documentaries around. You don't want to miss what's coming. And hey, drop in the comments right now, what country are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? I genuinely love seeing where in the world this reaches. Someone's watching this at 2 a.m. in Tokyo. Someone's watching from a coffee shop in London. Someone's watching from a truck stop in Texas. Tell me where you are. Let's see how far this goes. All right, back to the story. Because what happens next is the part that haunts people. The Dei Gratia, the ship that spotted the Mary Celeste, had left New York just 8 days after the Mary Celeste. Same general route, different destination. Its captain, David Morehouse, was, as I mentioned, a personal friend of Captain Briggs. They'd had dinner together just before departure. So when Morehouse spotted the Mary Celeste drifting erratically in the Atlantic, roughly 400 miles east of the Azores, his first reaction wasn't fear. It was concern. He assumed there'd been an accident. Maybe Briggs was injured. Maybe someone had gotten sick. He ordered First Mate Oliver DeVoe to row over with 2 other crew members and assess the situation. What DeVoe found when he boarded the Mary Celeste is the part that people can't explain. And I don't mean hard to explain. I mean, after 150 years of investigations, theories, expert analysis, and even a fictional story by a young Arthur Conan Doyle, who later created Sherlock Holmes, nobody has ever given a satisfying answer. Here is what DeVoe found. I'm going to go through this slowly, because every single detail matters. This is the first thing that destroys the obvious explanation. When most people hear abandoned ship, they think the ship was sinking. Of course they abandoned it. But the Mary Celeste was not sinking. It was not on fire. It was not structurally damaged. The hull was intact. The rigging was in decent shape, some minor damage but nothing catastrophic. The cargo, all 7,701 barrels of alcohol, was still in the hold. The ship had 6 months' worth of food and water on board. The pumps worked. There was absolutely no physical reason, none, for the crew to have left. Not a planned evacuation, not a calm decision to leave. Something that happened in an instant. Here's what DeVoe and his crew found. The captain's bed, unmade, with the impression of someone who had recently been lying in it. A child's toys, scattered on the floor of the captain's cabin. A rag doll, a small wooden horse. Sarah Briggs's harmonium, the small portable organ she brought everywhere, sitting in the cabin, music still propped up on the stand, as if someone had just stepped away from playing it. The ship's log, open on the captain's desk. The last entry was dated November 24th, 1872, 10 days before the ship was found. The ship's navigation equipment, the sextant, the chronometer, were missing, which is significant. A captain would grab these if he expected to be in the water. He'd need them to navigate a lifeboat. And the ship's only lifeboat, a small yawl that would have been stored on the main hatch, was gone. That means someone launched it deliberately. Someone climbed into it. Someone rowed away. But to where? And why? This is the detail that entered mythology. The detail that people still quote when they talk about ghost ships. Hot food was found on the table, in the ship's galley. A meal, mid-preparation. As if the cook had simply walked away in the middle of making breakfast. There were plates set, food laid out, a cup of tea, still warm. Think about that, warm tea. In the middle of the North Atlantic, on a ship drifting alone, with no one on board. Warm tea. That means the crew vanished in minutes. Not hours, not days, minutes. Whatever happened happened so fast that tea didn't have time to go cold. No blood. No weapons drawn, no damage to the ship's interior that would suggest a fight. Everything was orderly, clean. No one had been fighting. No one had been panicking, at least not in a way that left marks. 10 people, including a 2-year-old child, disappeared without leaving a single sign of what took them. Pause. Music fades slightly. When Oliver DeVoe rowed back to the Dei Gratia and gave his report to Captain Morehouse, Morehouse did something that makes complete sense in hindsight. He said nothing to the authorities right away. Instead, he put 3 of his own men on board the Mary Celeste, and they sailed both ships to Gibraltar, the nearest British port with a proper admiralty court. And in Gibraltar, the interrogations began. The British Vice Admiralty Court in Gibraltar opened its inquiry in December 1872, and almost immediately, they looked at the most obvious suspect, Captain David Morehouse, and the crew of the Dei Gratia. Think about it from the court's perspective. Here's a man who claims to have found an abandoned ship in the middle of the Atlantic. He's a personal friend of the missing captain. He conveniently arrives in port with both ships, which means he stands to receive a significant salvage reward. The court's investigator, a man named Frederick Soley Flood, Attorney General of Gibraltar, was convinced from the start that something criminal had taken place. He was looking for evidence of murder. He brought in experts to inspect the ship. They found a few things that made Flood's eyes narrow. On the bow of the ship, the front, the part that cuts through water, there were 2 small cuts, long diagonal cuts, in the wood. Flood's conclusion? Those were sword marks. Someone had attacked the ship. The experts he brought in disagreed. They said the cuts were consistent with the ship scraping against ice, or coral, or just rough water. Natural damage. Flood also found a barrel, one of the alcohol barrels that appeared to have been opened. He thought this was evidence that someone had broken into the cargo, gotten drunk, committed violence in a drunken rage. Again, the experts weren't convinced. 1 barrel out of 1,701. And the cargo was alcohol, not whiskey or rum. This was industrial denatured ethanol. It would make you very sick, very fast. It wasn't the kind of thing sailors would break into for a drink. But Flood kept pushing. He brought in a doctor to examine the ship for bloodstains, and the doctor, using the forensic technology available in 1872, reported that he had found blood on the blade of a sword found in the captain's cabin, on the railing of the ship, on the ship's floor. Murder, Flood concluded. The crew of the Dei Gratia had murdered everyone on the Mary Celeste, dumped the bodies overboard, and then staged the discovery for the salvage reward. There was only one problem with this theory. When the samples were re-examined years later, using actual modern forensic analysis, they weren't blood at all. They were rust stains. And what Flood had identified as a sword was a decorative dress sword, not a weapon, that showed no evidence of ever having been used. The court eventually released Morehouse and his crew. No charges were filed. The salvage claim was awarded, though at a reduced rate because the court was never fully satisfied with the story. But the court's inquiry answered nothing. Morehouse and his crew were released, and 10 people were still missing. Over the next 150 years, dozens of theories emerged. Let me walk you through the most serious ones, because some of them are genuinely unsettling. This is currently the most widely accepted scientific explanation. The cargo, 1,701 barrels of commercial alcohol, was highly volatile. Under the right conditions, it could produce enormous amounts of invisible, odorless vapor. When the Mary Celeste arrived in Gibraltar, 9 of the 1,701 barrels were empty. Not missing, empty. The alcohol was gone, but there was no stain, no residue on the outside of the barrels. This suggests those barrels had developed small leaks and vented their contents as vapor. Now imagine this, you're below deck on a ship. Suddenly there's a dull, muffled boom. Not an explosion exactly, more like a pulse of pressure. Maybe a hatch blows open. Maybe a flame ignites the vapor pocket briefly. Briggs, a cautious, experienced captain, would have made an immediate decision. Get everyone off the ship. Get them into the lifeboat. Assume the worst. Get clear of what might be about to become a fireball. He'd grab the essentials, navigation instruments, his wife, his daughter. He'd order his crew into the lifeboat. He'd keep the lifeboat tethered to the ship with a long rope so they could pull themselves back once they confirmed the danger had passed. But here's what investigators believe may have happened next. A strong wind, a sudden swell. The rope breaks, or was never tied securely enough, and the Mary Celeste, with its sails still set, begins to drift. Faster than a loaded lifeboat can row. The crew watches their ship pull away, tries to row after it. And in the North Atlantic, in late November, in open water, with no other ships in sight, they disappear. Not because of murder, not because of sea monsters, not because of the supernatural, because of a broken rope and a turn of wind. This theory is compelling. It explains almost everything. The missing navigation instruments, the sudden departure, the hot food left on the table, the orderly state of the ship because they planned to come back. They thought the danger was temporary, but it doesn't explain everything. Because if they drifted away in a lifeboat, even if they drowned, something would have been found. Bodies wash ashore. Lifeboat wreckage washes ashore. In the age before GPS, ships found debris all the time. Nothing from the Mary Celeste's crew was ever found. Not a piece of clothing. Not a single plank from the lifeboat. Not a child's toy. 10 people and a wooden lifeboat simply ceased to exist. Simple, brutal, and statistically very possible for the era. Pirates board the ship, kill everyone, dump the bodies overboard, take what they want, but for some reason leave the cargo. Maybe they were interrupted. Maybe they heard another ship approaching. They take the lifeboat or destroy it to hide the evidence. Except no signs of struggle, no blood, no violence anywhere on the ship. And 1,701 barrels of commercial alcohol, worth a significant amount of money in 1872, left completely untouched. Pirates who leave the cargo and take nothing but somehow still cause 10 people to vanish without a trace doesn't quite add up. The crew turns on the captain, kills Briggs and his family, takes the lifeboat, plans to disappear. But then, why leave the ship intact? If you're running from a murder scene, you don't leave the evidence floating in the Atlantic. You take the ship, you scuttle it, you make it disappear. And again, no blood, no signs of violence. I'm going to be honest with you here. This is the theory that serious researchers quietly acknowledge, not because they believe in the supernatural, but because it's intellectually honest. Sometimes the evidence simply doesn't fit any of our models. Sometimes something happens that we don't have a category for. Whatever occurred on the Mary Celeste on or around November 24th, 1872, it was fast. It was total. It left no physical trace. No other ship disaster in recorded maritime history has produced this combination of factors: a completely seaworthy vessel, an untouched cargo, signs of mid-activity abandonment, and zero trace of the missing crew. Not before. Not since. The Mary Celeste arrived in Genoa, Italy, its original destination, in March 1873. Its cargo was delivered. Life went on. The ship itself continued sailing for another 13 years, changing hands multiple times. 12 different captains. More bad luck, more minor disasters. Until finally, in 1885, its last captain, a man named Gilman Parker, deliberately ran it aground on a coral reef in Haiti in an insurance fraud scheme. Parker was prosecuted for barratry, the deliberate wrecking of a ship, but he died before he could be convicted. The wreck of the Mary Celeste was left on that reef, and it sat there, slowly disintegrating, for over a century. Until 2001, when an expedition led by author Clive Cussler located the wreck and positively identified it. The ship, or what was left of it, was finally confirmed at the bottom of the sea off Haiti. But the story didn't end with the ship. The story entered popular culture in a way that very few real mysteries ever do. In 1884, 12 years after the disappearance, a young unknown writer named Arthur Conan Doyle published a short story in a British magazine. The story was called J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. It was about a ghost ship, the Mary Celeste. Doyle slightly changed the name, told from the perspective of a fictional survivor. The story was fiction. Conan Doyle made that perfectly clear. But it was published in a magazine without a byline, and it was so convincing, so detailed, so psychologically real, that readers assumed it was a factual account. British newspapers reported on it as if it were news. The Gibraltar court, still technically investigating, issued a formal statement clarifying that the story was fiction. But the damage, or rather, the magic, was done. From that moment on, the Mary Celeste wasn't just a historical mystery. It was a legend. And legends, unlike facts, don't require explanations. I want to take a moment and talk about why this story won't let people go. Because we've now spent a significant amount of time on the facts, the evidence, the theories. And yet, I bet that right now, as you're listening to this, you're not thinking about vapor pressure differentials or salvage law. You're thinking about the tea, the warm cup of tea, the child's toys on the floor, the music on the harmonium stand. You're thinking about Sarah Briggs, a 30-year-old woman who packed her harmonium, brought her baby girl, kissed her 7-year-old son goodbye, and sailed into the Atlantic, and was never seen again. This is the psychological mechanism at the heart of every great mystery. It's not the unknown that haunts us. It's the almost known. We can feel the shape of what happened. We can sense the outline, but we can't quite see it. And human beings, we are not built to tolerate that. We are pattern recognition machines. Our brains evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to complete incomplete pictures. A half-seen predator in the tall grass. A face that almost but doesn't quite recognize. A sound that could be footsteps. We need resolution. And when we don't get it, when the pattern refuses to complete, we become obsessed. This is why the Mary Celeste has never left us. Not because it's the most dramatic maritime disaster in history, it isn't. Ships have sunk with thousands aboard. Entire fleets have been lost. But those tragedies have explanations. We can file them away. We can grieve and move on. The Mary Celeste gives us nothing to file, nothing to close, just a warm cup of tea, and 10 people who were here and then weren't. Let me tell you what I actually think happened. Not as definitive fact, because no one can give you definitive fact on this case, but as the most honest synthesis of 150 years of evidence. Here's the sequence of events I believe is most likely. November 24th, 1872. Somewhere in the Atlantic, between the Azores and Portugal. It's morning, probably early morning. Sarah Briggs is at the harmonium in the captain's cabin. Sophia, the 2-year-old, is playing on the floor nearby. The toys are scattered as children scatter toys. In the galley, the cook, Edward Head, is making breakfast. The tea is hot. Below deck, in the cargo hold, something changes. One of the alcohol barrels, or perhaps several, has been venting vapor through small leaks. The hold has slowly filled with an invisible, potentially flammable cloud of ethanol gas. Then, a spark. Maybe from the bilge pumps. Maybe from a lantern. Maybe from something we'll never identify. And the vapor, not the liquid alcohol, but the vapor ignites. There is no fire, not yet. Not a full explosion. But there is a concussive blast, a pressure wave, a boom that rattles every timber in the ship. Hatches blow open, panels crack. The sound is enormous. Captain Briggs, in the cabin or on deck, makes an immediate decision. He has no way of knowing whether this is the beginning of a catastrophic explosion or a one-time event. He has his wife on board. He has his infant daughter. He orders everyone into the lifeboat. Now. The crew doesn't argue. They grab what they're trained to grab, navigation instruments. Nothing else. No clothes. No food. Because they're not leaving. They're waiting. They drop the lifeboat into the water. They tie a rope, a long rope, called a halyard, from the lifeboat back to the Mary Celeste. The plan is simple. Stay far enough away from the ship to be safe if it explodes, but close enough that if it doesn't, they can pull themselves back in. They watch the ship. 5 minutes pass. 10 minutes. No explosion. And then, a wind shifts, or a wave hits at the wrong angle. Or, most likely, the rope, not properly secured in the chaos of evacuation, simply comes untied, and the Mary Celeste, sails still set, begins to drift. Accelerating slowly, then faster, as the wind takes hold. The crew rows toward it. But a loaded lifeboat, with 10 people, one of them a 2-year-old, cannot outpace a full-rigged sailing vessel in open water. They watch the Mary Celeste shrink toward the horizon. Captain Briggs, former man of science, former disbeliever in curses, watches his ship disappear. And then he looks around at his wife, his daughter, his crew. In an open lifeboat, in the North Atlantic, in late November. What happened next is probably the part of this story that maritime historians find most heartbreaking. They likely survived for several days. Briggs had navigation instruments. He knew their approximate position. He knew the shipping lanes. He would have tried to steer toward land or toward another ship. But November in the North Atlantic is brutal. The waves, the cold, the exposure. A small wooden lifeboat with no shelter, no food, no water. In those conditions would have been a death sentence within days, perhaps within hours if a storm found them. The bodies, as happens with most open sea drownings in deep water, would have sunk. The lifeboat, wood, not weighted metal, might have drifted for weeks before breaking up on some remote coastline, unidentified, unmourned. And that's why nothing was ever found. Not because of the supernatural, not because of pirates or mutiny or sea monsters, but because the ocean is vast and cold and keeps its secrets without effort. Here is what I want you to take away from this story. Not the theories, not the forensic details. This. On November 7th, 1872, 10 ordinary people sailed out of New York Harbor. A captain who believed in science over superstition. A wife who loved music enough to bring her harmonium across the Atlantic. A 2-year-old girl who didn't know she was on the most famous ghost ship in history. 8 working sailors trying to earn their pay. They did nothing extraordinary. They lived ordinary lives until the moment they didn't. And then, in some ordinary morning, somewhere between Portugal and the Azores, the world simply swallowed them. No warning, no explanation, no conclusion. Just here, and then not. This is the thing about the Mary Celeste that the ghost ship mythology misses. People want it to be spooky. They want sea monsters and time portals and alien abductions. They want a dramatic explanation commensurate with the dramatic disappearance. But the truth, or what comes closest to truth, is quieter than that. And somehow, that makes it worse. Because it means that the line between presence and absence, between here and gone, is thinner than we want to believe. A rope comes untied. A wind shifts. And a whole life, a whole family becomes a mystery that outlasts them by centuries. The Mary Celeste is not a ghost story. It is a story about how fragile we are. About how the ordinary can become extraordinary without a single warning sign. About how 10 people can be in the middle of life, eating breakfast, playing music, making tea, and then simply not be. And the world goes on. Ships keep sailing. Ports keep humming. And somewhere in the archives of the Gibraltar Admiralty Court, a file sits marked unresolved. 153 years. Still unresolved. The next time you're in the middle of an ordinary day, making tea, or playing music, or watching your child play on the floor, think of Sarah Briggs. Think of how she had no idea. And maybe that's the most important thing the Mary Celeste can teach us. Not about ghosts, not about the sea, but about presence. About being here, fully, in the ordinary moments, because you never know which one is the last. And that's the story of the Mary Celeste. One of the greatest unsolved mysteries in recorded maritime history, and honestly, in my view, one of the greatest unsolved mysteries, period. If you made it this far, thank you. Genuinely. This took a long time to research and write, and I hope you felt every second of it. Here's what I need from you right now. First, smash that like button. If this story gripped you, if you felt it, if you found yourself holding your breath at any point, that's the signal. Hit like. It tells the algorithm that people care about real stories like this one, and it helps this channel grow. Second, subscribe, if you haven't already. I promise you every single video on this channel goes this deep. Real history, real mysteries, real human stories told the way they deserve to be told. No fluff, no clickbait padding, just the story. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Third, and this one is my favorite part of every video. Drop a comment below. What country are you watching from? And what time is it right now where you are? Someone's watching this at 3 a.m. in the Philippines. Someone's on their lunch break in London. Someone's driving through Kansas with this in their earbuds. I love seeing where this reaches. Tell me. And if you have your own theory, if you think you know what really happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste, tell me that too. I read every single comment. Until next time, stay curious, stay present. And maybe, just maybe, finish your tea while it's still warm.